This painting practically painted itself. We're going to be using water paint so that we can paint this beautiful wisteria. Before I jump in, welcome to my channel. My name is Jillian. I am a full-time watercolor artist who quit her job as a psychologist to pursue my passion so that I can show you how to embrace the mess and magic of watercolor. Let's take a look at the supplies that we'll be using. In today's wisteria video, I want to capture it in a very wet wash. So you're going to see me use a lot of wet in wet, and I'm going to start off by pre-wetting my paper just with clear, clean water. And I'm using a big brush for this so that I get to cover a lot of space. And I just want a really even, nice, clean wash of water. Not too wet. I don't want it to be soaping wet. So next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick out some of my purples. And the thing about the wisteria flower is that it's got this cascading coming down kind of buds. So we are going to have everything cascading downwards, and at the same time I'm going to have some in the background and then some that are kind of coming out at you in the foreground. So we're going to be thinking about background and foreground. Now, while my paper is still wet, sometimes it might start to dry out, and this is where I use my mister to just make sure that it's nice and wet. So I'm going to pull out my purples first, and I just wanted to show you this palette here. This is a really beautiful one, and this is actually something that I've been working on. So I'm working on a color mixing class at the moment, and these were all mixed from primary colors. And you can see that I've managed to pull out some really nice purples, and they're also granulating. You can see because the colors have started to separate from each other. The pigments are a little bigger than usual. So let's dive in. I'm going to just pull out some of these beautiful purples, and with granulating colors you want to always be swishing it around on the palette to make sure that it's nice and mixed, so that when you put it down on the paper you get this nice color. So I don't want to waste these colors, so I thought it would be such a great opportunity for me to just add in onto my paper. And you can see that I'm just randomly dotting the space. This is a pretty big piece of paper. It is actually 10 by 14 inches, and I like the big movements that I can get from it. And I'm not really fussing on the shapes of the flowers at the moment because I'm just creating a background. And in my background I want it to be nice and soft, but I can see that these areas have started to dry because I've gotten some hard lines. That's fine, and I should mimic the shapes where it's coming down. So you can see that I'm kind of pulling it down. I'm using my square brush to do that. So kind of pulling out this light wash. I'm going in with water in between, just so you get different color values. Not filling an entire space, you want to leave some nice white gaps. I'm intentionally leaving some puddles also because I want the colors to blend and bleed into one another. Just for interest, I'm going to add some warm purple. So these purples have a slight tinge of red in them. Now you can use whatever brush that you want. You don't have to use a square brush. I love using the square brush because of the shapes that it gives me. So that's my preference. And I've added some ultramarine to my purple mix here because I wanted it to have a bit of blue as well. So you can see it creates a little interest. Mindful that the shapes are mostly going to be downward. And then I also do see that in between there is this really faint green. This is where I'm going to create that green as well, mixing in some of my purple mixture with some of my green here, so I get that green. And that green seems to be on a warmer side in some parts, so I'm going to pull some of that green around. And I feel like adding some of that greens and letting it bleed with the purple was such a great idea. Now the thing is, it's important not to overwork this piece. You don't want to over add the colors and blend. So sometimes we got to sit back and wait a little just to pull back and also focus on the forefront details a little. So I'm just going to create more of this purple, and it just so happens that this blue and this red creates this beautiful purple right here. So let's add some of that. Depending on where it's wet, you can get some shapes. The funny thing about the wisteria is that there's a danger point in choosing a purple that looks like that and creating these round oval shapes, because it could end up looking like grapes and you don't want that. So try as best as possible. As I was painting this, I started to grow in that awareness. Try to add more blue tones and also start to go away from that really round oval shape so that you get something that looks a little bit more organic. As the paper is still wet, you can also lift off paint, which is what I'm doing here. So I'm lifting off some paint on some areas just to create a bit of definition, whether it is the edge of a petal or something like that. And I'm just alternating between moving through blues and purples and also adding in some depths of green here and there, and being very, very mindful of the stage in which my paper is at while it's wet. Because while it's starting to dry and it starts to move into the damp stage, this is where it can be dangerous to go in with a much wetter brush, especially if we keep going in to add paint. And this is where your blooms and backwash can happen. So keeping all of this in mind, there's a lot of things to eyeball at the moment, but I think the most important thing that you have to remember is to have fun, relax, enjoy the process, and really just let the paint do the work for you. Now my paper has started to fully dry, and this is where I'm going to go in with a wet in dry technique and add darker layers of blue. And you don't actually have to add a darker color or hue or value, but rather just using the same consistency or color can give you a darker value just because you are layering over an existing painted area. So what exactly you're doing is essentially glazing. I have switched over to my smaller flat brush, and this is a 1/2 inch stroke brush from Princeton Velvet Touch. You can find the list of all the supplies and brushes that I use in the description below. I love using the flat brush just because of the various edges that it gives me, and you can use whatever brush that you like, and I feel like the type of brush that you choose is always very personal, because it's not just about knowing how to use it exactly, but it's also about understanding the preference that you have for the shapes that your brush can produce. And maybe a round brush is something where you like the shapes that it comes up with. So I would encourage you to think about the brushes that you own and what kind of shapes they can do, how do you manipulate them to get various shapes, and then from there, kind of decide what kind of brushes would match the flowers that you're painting. Here is where I'm looking through the reference photo, and what I'm starting to do is to really observe where the shadows are, and I'm just painting the dark shadows, which is why you can see that I'm painting in really strange irregular shapes and they don't really resemble the petals, and that's really the pockets of dark color that I see between the reference photo that I'm trying to capture. This is so that your flower or your petals start to stand out because you are trying to elevate it and bring it past the background. So you're trying to create a separation between your foreground and your background. Now, I cover all of these skills and more in one of my signature workshops called From Flat to Fabulous, where we go into negative painting, understanding reference photos, and using monochrome painting to help you to elevate your painting. You can find all the details in the description below. The moment you feel lost in your painting, I think this is where you want to start adding your green stems, and this gives you a bit of a focal point or at least direction as to where you should bring all your petals together. And then subsequently, what I noticed in my painting was that there were a lot of hard lines, and this is where I wanted to create some softness. So I'm using a big brush and just wetting the area with clean water so that I can add some softer lines. So this again creates some of that background, and you can see because the surface of the paper is wet, you're going to get some really nice soft blends and bleed. One of the things I really love doing is adding small little dots and dabs, and this is really me varying the shape because when there's really small dots and dabs at the back, it suggests distance, something that you want to try and do as well throughout your painting. And I'm going in again, trying to add a bit more of that green to really create that contrast between the green and the purple so that the purple doesn't overshadow everything. Now I'm going in with a little gouache. So this is actually some gouache to layer over because I think it would be fun to have this really pop of light blue lavender over. And this is also to give it almost like a little bit of a highlight. As this painting develops, you would see that using the various techniques in watercolor, be it wet in wet or wet in dry, and then thinking about your brush strokes, thinking about your color choice, and how exactly to paint in the different elements, all of that starts to become a rhythm, because you can see that as I was painting the wisteria, I was literally just adding in layers as I was going along, and also taking a step back and standing up to see the whole big picture before I go in and add in details. Knowing when to stop is really a work in progress, even for myself. Sometimes I have tendencies to overwork my paintings as well, and I think that taking a step back and taking a break is such a great way. Now, I have to tell you that at the end of this painting, my camera roll actually ran out of space and battery, and then I had wanted to continue adding in more detail. Now, thankfully, because my camera actually ran out of space, I stopped doing the painting, and when I came back to it, I realized that I shouldn't add in any more elements. So I feel like sometimes it's so important for us to just take a step back and then recalibrate and it's more like, revisiting the painting again with new eyes, just to see how best you can basically let the painting speak for itself. Thank you so much for joining me here today. It was so fun to paint this together with you. I hope that you've tried this out, and let me know in the comments if there's anything that you've got questions about, or even if you have tried doing a painting like this. I would love to check out your paintings, get on Instagram and connect with me, whether it's on Crafty Fox or Brush Movement. I would love to see your paintings as well. I had so much fun painting with you, and I'm also grateful that you stayed throughout and continue painting with me. I hope that with this video you could see the potentials of using water in your painting and really just letting the magic happen and letting the paint paint itself. Now, if you are keen to binge watch some of my other videos, you can find my playlist down in the description below, where I share with you all the different how-to tutorials that I've done. I can't wait for you to share with me your work. You can find me on Instagram. If not, connect with me here, comment below in my YouTube channel. And above everything else, remember that this entire process is nothing without fun. I'll see you again next week.